Hi, welcome back. And in this video, we're going to add a new gun to our Lyra project. And we're going to do this in two parts. This first part is we're going to start at the very beginning with a static mesh that we can download free from a marketplace. But that static mesh doesn't have anything we need from an execution perspective on a gun. And we'll take that all the way through to Unreal using Blender, largely because it's free, as this is the content creation tool to help you go through these steps. So for this tutorial, I found on TurboSquid this pump action shotgun. And so since the standard shotgun is not a pump action shotgun, I thought this would be a good model to bring in as the tutorial. It's available free. So Noble6, thank you for your model. That's what we're using for this tutorial. So you can go ahead and download this model off TurboSquid. The link is here, and I will include the link in the description of the video. I'll also include this other YouTube link, which is basically an explanation of how a pump action shotgun works, which is handy for figuring out what pieces have to move and how to basically break the model apart into its subcomponents so that we can animate the shotgun effectively. So in this video, we're going to go through 7 steps. It's likely going to be fairly long. We're going to first import that model at the appropriate scale and orientation in Blender. Then we're going to adjust the pivot point. We're going to use Blender to move the pivot point on the model. We'll then split the model into its subcomponents so that we can work with each of the pieces of the model independently. We'll migrate a skeleton from Unreal into Blender so that we can put our model and the skeleton together. Then we're going to merge that model back together into one model, create the UV map, texture paint so that we have a mask that we can use inside Unreal, and then finally export it out of Blender and import it into Unreal so that we have the skeletal mesh asset we need rigged and ready to go for part 2. All right, so let's jump into it. I will try to put timestamps in the comments so that you can move freely through these 7 sections, and let's jump into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is export a existing weapon so that we can use it as a side-by-side comparison as we go through the steps to model our new weapon consistent with the characteristics. So what I'm going to do is take the rifle, and I'm going to use the skeletal mesh, and I'm going to go to Asset Actions and Export, and then I've already done this, the file's here, but I'm going to do it again. I'm going to say save. I'm just going to leave this as the default. The only thing I do is take off collision because we don't need the collision channel exported. Everything else you can leave the same. Go ahead and export that. Then you're going to flip over to Blender. And if you haven't used Blender before, this is kind of the default how things load up. What I'm going to do is first highlight the cube and hit the delete key to get rid of it. I'm going to go up into the file, import from an XBX file, and pull in that rifle. And you'll see the rifle, I'm just going to scroll in with my mouse wheel. So you see that the rifle came in and it's oriented along the y-axis here and the x-axis here, and it's Z upright. So that's the orientation of the weapon coming out of Unreal. So that's the orientation we're going to want to make sure our shotgun is set in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to File, import the OBJ that we got online, the shotgun. And I've done a little bit of experimentation on this already. If I bring it in at scale 1, it's going to be massive. So instead what we're going to do is 0.001. So we're basically scaling it down 1,000 times. And the forward axis through experimentation -X, and the up axis minus Z. For this particular model, this just rotates it so that the shotgun is in the same orientation as our rifle. Basically, it's just trial and error. You could easily import it and rotate it yourself, but since I've already done the figuring on this, I just do it this way, and we're going to import. And you'll see that the shotgun sits in the same orientation now. So if I go over here and hide all the elements of my rifle, you'll see that the shotgun is sitting in the same orientation as the rifle. So good. So we've imported it in the correct orientation. Now the next thing we have to do is adjust the model pivot point. The pivot point for the rifle, if I click on it, you'll see is on this handle. So if we zoom in, the pivot point sits on the handle. You can see that if I try to rotate it, it will rotate around the handle. Control Z to break that out. However, the pivot point for the shotgun is set here slightly below the pump action chamber. And we really want it where the right hand is going to sit, so we kind of want it kind of right back here. And so in order to do that, we're going to go into edit mode, and we're basically going to select a couple of these vertices. So I just dragged and selected a few of those. You could scroll in, use the hand, use the orbit to kind of orient yourself to exactly how you want to see it, and then maybe select these two dots right here. So what I've done is I've selected 2 dots, and now I'm going to do Shift S. Shift S brings up this menu structure, and I'm going to move the cursor to my selected area. So when I do this, the 3D cursor moved right here under the trigger. So you see that red and white circle has moved to that location. I'm going to go back to object mode. I'm going to select object, set origin to the current 3D cursor location, and that will snap the pivot point to wherever I had my cursor. So if we now go back to looking at the shotgun, you'll see that our new pivot point is sitting here slightly behind the trigger. Arguably, we may want to move that back onto the stock, but that's the general idea. You can experiment with different locations, but you really want to put the pivot point in the right spot because that's where the right hand is going to orient itself with your character, and it just makes it a whole lot easier than having to move things around. All right, the next thing we have to do is we have to split this mesh up into a couple of sub pieces. And what I mean by that is we're going to end up putting a skeleton on here that we can animate, and we need certain pieces to be able to move. So the best way I can think of explaining that is let's hide the shotgun. Let's bring up our rifle, and you'll notice that our rifle has a skeleton attached to it. So that skeleton has a grip, a door, trigger, magazine, barrel, and bolt as bones, and it also has vertex groups of the same names. And what that allows us to do, so if let me try to get this into view, and I select the object, that's not what I want to do. I select I can never remember how to get this thing to go into pose mode. There it is. So if we select this element, the root of the skeleton, then in this menu, pose mode will show up. So we're going to go into pose mode. And what that'll allow us to do is move these bones and see what happens to the model as we move those bones. So I'm going to expand this and I'm going to select the magazine, which is this bone right here. And then I'm going to select this, which enables me to move the bone. And then I'm just going to move this bone down. And you'll see that when I move this bone down, the magazine moves down. So this is when I want to reload. I need to be able to take this piece of the gun and move it independent of the rest of the gun. So that's an element we're going to have to replicate in our model. I believe this is the bolt. Sorry, no, the barrel. One of the things in this model is when you fire, the barrel can move in and out to simulate kind of letting the fire go as you shoot, 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 shoot. So in this model, the barrel is a separate element. Put that back into position. As is the bolt, which comes out of the back here. So you'll see it if I go all the way back. You see the bolt trigger back there, which is actually, I think, easier to see on the other side. When we pull this bolt back, actually, it doesn't really matter that much. Since I'm on this side, we're going to use the door. So this is where the shell casings eject in the animation. Typically, the door is going to be rotated. So if I rotate our model a little bit, that'll allow me to grab this green line and rotate the door up the other way. So here you see the door moving. Hopefully you can see that on the video. What I might do is just snap around here. And instead of rotate, move, just so you can see it better, I'm just going to move the door way up here. So the idea is that that door flap rotates as shells are being ejected. And then the trigger, a very subtle feature, but the trigger can be depressed and moved independently. So this is a separate object. The important part of all this is the model is broken into a series of pieces. Each of those pieces is then associated with a bone. And we're going to do the exact same thing with our model. So to break apart the mesh, and I'm not an expert in Blender, there are probably multiple ways to do this. This is one way to do it. It seems to work for me. It's not exactly the easiest, but I'll give it a go. So I'm going to show you taking the trigger and separating the trigger away from the shotgun, and then offline I'll do some other pieces. But basically we want to make sure that we have our object selected, and we're in object mode, which will allow us to go to edit mode. We then want to make sure that we are both in the faces, so not the vertice line, but face mode. And we want to go way over here to this little triangle and make sure we have X-ray turned on. This will allow us to select all the way through the gun, not just the faces we see, but the faces on the back side. So if you didn't have this X-ray on, and I selected these faces and hit H to hide them, what I ended up doing is, if I rotate the gun, is I only hid half of these faces. And what I really want to do is, if I do, let's bring those faces back. What I really want to do is be in X-ray mode here, so that when I select faces and I press H to hide them, I'm actually hiding all the way through the gun. So I've hidden all of those faces. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. H to hide. I'm going to do the same thing kind of across here. H to hide. And I'm going to continue this carefully, making sure I don't hit the trigger. So that looks good. Trigger is still there. I'm going to take these faces, hide them. Take these faces, hide them. And I'm just going to continue to do this as effectively as I can. And then when I get down to the last couple of faces, I'm basically going to select an individual face just like that. And I can either hide that one, or there is select connected, which is Control L. And you'll see that that selected the faces that are physically connected to this one. And then I can press H to hide, Select this face, Control L, H to hide. Select this, see if I select that face, Control L, H to hide. All right, and it looks like I've hidden everything except the trigger. So now I'm going to select the trigger. And because I'm in X-ray mode, see if I can't look around that effectively. I selected not only the front faces, and that's probably not the best, but you can see that all the way around I have them selected. So with those selected, I'm going to press the letter P, and that's going to create over here a new child. So I'm going to hit P and say by selection. And that made this a separate element here in the tree. So I have these two that are, I believe this is my trigger. Yeah, so you see the trigger highlighting. So I'm going to press F2 on that and call that trigger. Now we have to bring back the rest of the shotgun. So in order to do that, we're going to select the main object, and you can just sort of, I think, select any given face. Then you're going to press A for all. So that will select all of the faces associated with that object. And then you're going to press Alt H to unhide. And that brings back the rest of the gun. So now we can call this main one, I'm going to call it body. And I'm not really sure, but I'll call them both body. So we now have trigger and body. And then I will go offline, and so I could hide the trigger. So the trigger disappears, or I could show the trigger and hide the body. So I just have the trigger. I'm going to go ahead and isolate the rest of the pieces and come back to the video to continue. So you can pause the video and do the same. All right, so we've separated the mesh into its components. And before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and delete the camera and the light. We don't need them. So I'm going to hit camera and delete, light and delete. And if I hide the body, you'll see that I have three pieces left. I've got the trigger, I've got the bolt, and then I've got the pump action, the piece that moves forward and backwards. Hiding the pump, hide the trigger, you just have the bolt, bring the trigger back in, get rid of the bolt, bring the pump back in. So all these are now independent pieces between the body, which basically is everything but the trigger, the bolt, and the pump. We bring the pump back in, we bring the bolt back in, and we can bring the trigger back in. So at this point, what we want to do is actually take the skeleton off of the rifle and attach it to the shotgun, and then we're going to move the bones around and parent the bones to those pieces so that as we move the bones in animations, those pieces will move in our total mesh. So for our next step, we're going to hide the shotgun and bring back the rifle. And we're simply going to, the rifle is the bone structure and then this mesh right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete the mesh. So we're going to select this, hit delete, and now we're just left with the actual bones for the rifle. And our task now is to take those bones and attach them to this and look at it from some different views. Okay, so the mesh and the bones are not in the same spot. Remember, we had one gun here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, I'm going to select the body. We do control, and we get the bolt, the pump, and the trigger, not the bones. And then I'm going to make sure I'm in move mode. And in object mode move, I'm going to move all of the meshes to the green line. Okay. And then I'm just going to double check. Yeah, that's not where I want things. So I want the pivot point to be at the origin. So we're going to move the entire shotgun forward on this green line so that we intersect appropriately. So the same things are selected. I'm going to move the pivot point right there so that our pivot point is in the origin of blue, green, and red. Good. So our gun is positioned appropriately, and our skeleton is also positioned in the same spot. And so now we can select our skeleton. We're going to move into, why is that not? We're going to select our skeleton in edit mode. We're going to select the grip, and we're going to move the grip, which is right here, to this spot. So we're going to slide the grip right there. So we're in alignment with that. Then we're going to take the door, and the door is right here. And I might actually move that back a little bit. The trigger, I'm going to move that down to about there. The magazine, move that up right about there. The barrel, so I'm going to take the barrel, and I'm actually going to move the barrel all the way out here. Even though we have no recoil action and no animation, it's just good to have it in the right spot. And the bolt, I'm going to put right there. And then the only thing is, why is the grip looking like that? Not 100% sure. I might have to do some research. But nonetheless, the grip is here in the right spot. Not sure why it's long like that. Oh, you know what? It's probably the orientation. So all the bone orientations are this way. Yeah, the grip is that way as well. Okay. So I've moved my bones into the right spot, or at least where I believe them to be in the right spot relative to the mesh. And now it's time to start attaching the bones to this mesh so that when we move bones, the meshes move. Okay, now we're going to create vertex groups. So we've separated our mesh into multiple pieces so it's easy for us to select them and create vertex groups of those pieces. So I'm going to start with the trigger. So I'm going to select the trigger. Let's pan here. And so I'm in object mode. I've select the trigger object. Oh, sorry, I'm in object mode. I select the trigger. I go to edit mode. I press A, which selects all the faces. I scroll down in this list to this triangle, which allows me to create vertex groups. So I'm going to hit the plus sign, and it creates this group, which I'll press F2 and call trigger. I don't know why that doesn't work. Doesn't matter. I'm going to take these and hit assign. And what that does is under trigger, I now have a vertex group. If I press F2 here, it seems to work. So I'm not sure why F2 here doesn't work, but nonetheless, the trigger now has a vertex group called trigger, And it's important that the vertex group matches the bone name. So trigger matches trigger, so that when we link these together, that bone will be associated with this vertex group automatically. So to that end, I'm actually going to rename body to match grip. So I'm going to do that. F2 is grip. And I don't know if this matters, but for consistency, I'll call that grip. And pump is what? Really the magazine, right? So in a rifle, you have a magazine with bullets, but in a pump action shotgun, you have a pump. So I'm going to rename that magazine. Magazine. And so I'll be in object mode. This will get a little bit repetitive. I'll select the object, which is the magazine. I'll go to edit mode. I'll press A to select everything. I'll go to my vertex group. I'll hit plus, and I'll hit assign. That assigns a vertex group to the magazine. I'll press F2 and call that magazine. So a little bit of a weird workflow. Again, there's probably easier ways or better ways to do this. I have bolt and bolt, so that's good. So I'm going to go to object mode, and I'm going to select the bolt. I'm going to go to edit mode, press A to select all of them. And then under bolt, under this green triangle, I'm going to create a vertex group and assign them. So all of these are assigned to this one. All right, so now let's double check. I have a vertex group for bolt. I have not created one for the main grip. I've created one for the magazine. That is our mesh, and I've created one for the thing. So the last one to do is to go object mode, select the grip, edit, select all, create a new vertex group, and assign. And rename that as grip. So at this point, I should have F2 bolt. I have a vertex group called bolt. I have a vertex group called grip. I have one called magazine. And I have one called trigger. And all of the individual pieces are represented in each of those vertex groups. And those names match trigger, magazine, nothing for barrel, nothing for bolt, nothing for door, and grip. So the skeleton names matches the vertex names. And now what we're going to do is we're going to save this bad boy, because we're going to take the meshes and recombine them back into one now. So I'm going to take bolt, and actually I'm going to do grip last. So I'm going to take the bolt and the magazine. Object mode. I'm going to take the bolt and the magazine. And I'm going to do object join. And that collapsed those two. So now magazine and bolt vertex groups are under the magazine object. Then I'm going to take the magazine object and the trigger object. So I have the magazine and the trigger. The magazine object includes these two, the magazine, which is the pump, and the bolt, and now the trigger. And I'm going to join those two. So these three vertex groups are the same. And then finally, I'm going to take the grip and the trigger, and I'm going to join those. Oops, I did them backwards. So we ended up with something called trigger. And what we really want to do is call this shotgun. Oops. Whoa, 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 whoa. Shotgun. Shotgun. And it has 4 vertex groups: the trigger, the magazine, the bolt, and the grip. And they're all separated so that we can attach the corresponding bones to that shotgun. So now we're in object mode. We're going to select the mesh first. We're going to hold down Shift, and we're going to select the bones, which any one of these will do, I think right about here. So I have the bones highlighted. And I'm going to do a Control P to parent them. And I'm going to parent them with empty groups. So that's this one right here. And what that did is it parented the shotgun and its corresponding vertex groups to the skeletal mesh. And if I move the magazine bone in pose mode, the magazine should slide. So I can animate this bone and have the magazine do what it needs to do. The same thing should apply for the trigger, although it's going to be hard to see. The trigger here, if I move the trigger, it will move the trigger by itself. And I guess if I move the grip, it's probably easiest to rotate. If I rotate the grip, the entire gun will rotate with it. All right, so our bones are attached to the pieces of the mesh that are necessary. And then the final step in here is to actually create the animations so that we animate the bones and all of the things happen for the mesh. We can do a couple cleanups. So obviously we want to now call this shotgun as our skeleton, and all of this should be fine. Now that we have our vertex group set and our bone structure set, we basically could export this and import it into Unreal. But before we do that, we're going to set up a mask so that we can actually paint this multicolor as opposed to just being gray when we import it. So if you go into Unreal and you look at any of the weapons, you'll see that they have the diffuse channel, the color of sort of white and black. They have their roughness, metallic, and ambient inclusion map, and then they have a mask. And the mask determines where the colors are painted. So what we're going to do is create a mask, a red, green, blue mask, inside of Blender so that when we apply our material in Unreal, we can actually color the stock differently than the rest of the pieces. So we're going to create this mask before we export. So we go back into Blender, and if we move over to the shading tab, you should get this material. This is exactly the same as materials in Unreal. So actually, this is the material. I'm going to press F2 and call that material shotgun. And so material shotgun, get this thing to move a little bit. I can never figure out how to scroll around here. So what we're going to do is hit Shift A to add, and then type image, and we're going to create an image texture. That's this one here. And then we're going to take that color as the base color into this, and you'll see that it went completely black. We're going to create a new texture, and we're going to call it texture shotgun mask. and we'll leave it as 1024 by 1024. This you could make 512 by 512 or a 2K texture, 4K texture, whatever you need. And I'm going to leave the default color as black. And so I hit OK, and I have a black shotgun. So I now have a texture in a material. That material is on our shotgun mesh. And I can now go to my UV editor, and you'll see this mess of kind of garbage here. I want to make sure that the shotgun texture is what's being displayed, which is here in the background. On the UV editor side, you can make sure your mode is set correctly. So if you go to edit mode, I can hit A to select everything, hit U to unwrap, and I'm going to do the smart UV projection unwrap. So you could go through, create seams and all of that. This is not a UV unwrapping course, so I'm just going to hit the smart and hit OK. And what that basically does is unwrap this object onto this texture, and you can see the stock barrel is here, and then a bunch of the other pieces are all over this texture. So that's probably not the best way to unwrap it, but you can play around in here for hours if you'd like. I just wanted to basically get a good unwrap on this texture, and then I'm going to go to texture painting, and here I'm going to be able to basically play with different colors. So I'm going to go ahead and set my color to actually completely blue. So RGB, red to 0, green to 0, blue to 1. So now I'm painting in complete blue. Oops, sorry, 0. And I'm going to zoom in here, and I can basically paint the stock, and you'll see the blue show up in the UV map. So I probably should have done this before I merged the mesh. It might have been easier to deal with all the metal parts. But basically I'm going to say, okay, all of this is going to be blue, which we will in editor make kind of a wood grain look to it, or maybe we'll make that white to be consistent. I can go here and turn on X-ray so that I'm painting, I think, both sides. X-ray doesn't seem to paint both sides. So I can basically move around and make sure I paint all of the stock blue. And so this is a bit of a tedious process, but basically what I'm doing is making sure that, and I can paint over here too. So if I wanted to just paint this blue, because I know that that's the stock, I can paint this blue. And sometimes it's easier to just paint in the UV map than try to paint in the model. But I'll move the model around, and I will do some more painting. I can switch to red. If I wanted to paint the trigger, maybe red to be metallic, and any of the pieces that are going to be metallic, I might choose red or green. Basically just red, green, and blue, so you have a mask of the overall gun so that you can apply different materials inside UV. So I'm going to stop the video here. I'll paint this thing out a little bit more, and then I'll come back. All right, so we finished painting out our mask. It would definitely have been easier if I did that before I grouped the mesh back together again. So if you have the opportunity, I would do the texture painting before you put it all together. So the last thing to make sure is, so you're all done painting, and you can do File, Save. The important thing is the texture itself, this image over here, hasn't been saved. You see here the image has the star next to it. So you want to go into the image, and I'm actually going to save that texture. And so now I'm going to say, okay, this is my shotgun mask, and I'm going to save that image. And so I've saved that off as an image. Just to be safe, I now have that mask as a texture file. That includes, I definitely would have done more time unwrapping. The smart unwrap kind of put a bit of the bolt kind of scattered throughout. It took the stock and the pump and kind of has them a little bit scattered out. So it was a little hard to paint. I probably could have used the real estate better, but for the tutorial, that's good enough. So we now have a fully painted, fully rigged skeletal mesh. And let's go ahead and see if we can't export and import that into Unreal. So just let me double check that I can clear out my temporary folder. So I made a temporary folder. Yeah, I'll just delete those. And we're going to go over here and we do File, save it one more time, File, Export, FBX. We're going to call it Shotgun. And we're going to come over here to the Properties side and we're going to say I want the armature and the mesh. Those are the things that I definitely want. I don't care about cameras or lamps. And I'm going to go down here and say geometry. I want the smoothing group to be based on the faces. This is what happens when you sometimes import FBXs and it says no smoothing group found. It meant that it was exported without a smoothing group. So I'm going to smooth based on faces. And then on the armature, I'm going to not add leaf bones. If I left the leaf bones on, you end up with one more bone at the end of each chain. We don't want that, so we're going to save and export. And if we had done any animations in here, which we haven't, we're going to do that all in Unreal. We'd want to bake in any animation. So at this point, I have a skeletal mesh. It's got our armature or our bones. It's got our smoothing group, and I'm going to go ahead and export that. Great. So now we're going to go grab that out of our download folder, take that over to Unreal, drop it in our temporary folder, and I think we're going to take all the defaults. We're going to take skeletal mesh, we're going to take the mesh, the skin weightings. We're not going to assign an existing skeleton, so it creates a new one. We didn't do any animation, so we don't have to worry about that. And all the scaling we did up front, so it should be fine. So let's import all and see what we get. All right, so we got our mask, we got our material, we got our skeleton, our physical asset, and our actual skeleton. So if we open this up, mesh context, I think that's all fine. You'll see that we now have the, it's hard to get used to WASD after being in Blender for a bit. We have our masked out shotgun. We have our magazine. And if I actuate that bone, so I'm selecting the magazine bone, note the bone structure came across effectively. And if I grab that, it will move the magazine as I animate the magazine. Put that back into place. And I have the trigger or the bolt. So if I select the bolt, I can actuate the bolt separate from the rest of the mesh. So import looks good. Mask, again, could have been a better mask, but basically we now have a mask that allows us to texture our shotgun, and that seems to be good. I would likely go into my material, and rather than just feeding in the mask, I'm going to do a 3-color. I think I need 3. So this one, we're going to do white, kind of right there. And that will be everything that has a red texture. So we're going to take that color. I haven't been in here in a long time. And we're going to take the red channel against this color. And then we're going to take the green channel. We need 3 of these. Again, you can do whatever you want for yours. I'm just going to take the green channel times this color and take the blue channel times this color. And then I'm going to combine, or is it add? Add components. No, I think you just straight add. Then I'm going to add this together with this, and then add that result to this result. Put that into our base color. So anywhere that was red is going to be white. Anywhere that was green, which was our trigger, we're going to make that kind of a gray, a little darker gray. And then anywhere that was blue, which is our stock, for now I'm going to just make pink. Okay, so if I save that as our new shotgun material, we will see that our shotgun gets repainted, and we have, based on the mask profile, a pink and white shotgun where the trigger and the bolt are gray. And then we can go ahead and animate this and create all the assets we need to finish our weapon in game.